The two owners would own the entire property together. In other words, one owner is not entitled to possess one half of the property and the other owner the other half of the property. The owners are both entitled to occupy the property. This is referred to as unity of possession. While possession is not divided, the ownership interest is divided. There is no requirement for the owners to own equal shares. One owner may own 99% and the other owner 1%. The ownership is set forth in the deed, which is recorded at the local county recorder's office. If the deed does not include the fractional ownership, equal ownership is assumed. For example, if the deed contains 3 owners but no percentage ownership, all 3 owners are deemed to own 33.33% of the property. Each tenant and common owner has the right to do what they wish with their ownership rights. They may sell, mortgage, or otherwise transfer their fractional share without the consent of the other owners. Obviously, an individual owner would not have the right to transfer or mortgage any shares from the other owners of the real property without their consent. Many mortgage lenders will not lend on a fraction of a property but will require consent of all the owners. A share from one tenant and common owner may be inherited by the owner's heirs. In other words, if one tenant and common owner dies, the owner's share of the property will transfer to their heirs as designated by the owner's will. Tenant and common owners may be natural or legal persons. For example, 2 companies may own real property as tenants in common. A natural person, human being, may own a property with the corporation as tenants in common. Let's review a few examples. Bob and Bill own a property as tenants in common. The property is a duplex which they use as a rental property. The deed granting them joint ownership does not specify the percentage ownership. How much do they each own? If the deed does not specify the ownership, the owners are assumed to own equal shares. Therefore, Bob and Bill each own 50% of the property. Bob would like to occupy his half of the property. How do the owners determine who owns which half? Bob and Bill do not have the right to occupy their separate shares. The possession rights are not split. Bob does not have the right to occupy 50% of the property in connection with his 50% ownership. Bill wishes to sell his share of the duplex. He sells his shares to Sue. What does the ownership of the duplex look like now? After the sale, Bob and Sue now own the property as tenants in common. They each own 50% of the property. Sue drafts a will which grants an equal share of her ownership to both of her children. Sue passes away, and the property transfers to her children, Dave and Emily. What does the ownership of the duplex look like now? Bob still owns his 50%. Now Dave and Emily own Sue's share of the property. The ownership of the property now breaks down as follows. Tenants in common, Bob 50%, David 25%, Emily 25%. Originally as tenants in common, Bob owned 1/2 and Sue owned 1/2. Sue, upon death, wills her interest to Dave and Emily. Bob still owns his 1/2. David owns 1/4 and Emily now owns 1/4 according to the provisions in Sue's will. Let's review another example. ABC Corporation owns a commercial building jointly with Alex. ABC Corporation owns 75% and Alex owns the other 25%. The deed sets forth the ownership percentages. ABC Corporation decides to sell the property. They sell their share to XYZ Corp. The ownership is now broken down as follows. Tenants in common. XYZ Corporation 75%. Alex 25%. Alex's will specifies that his ownership shall be inherited equally by his 5 children. Alex dies. How does the ownership break down now? Tenants in common. XYZ Corporation 75%. Child 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 each 5%, for a total of 25% formerly owned by their father and given to them by the will upon his death. Child 1 leaves his share equally to his 2 children. Child 5's will leaves her share to her daughter. Alex's children, 1 and 5, both die. How does the ownership break down now? Tenants in common, XYZ Corporation 75%. Grandchild 1, 2.5%. Grandchild 2, 2.5%. Child 2, 3, and 4, each 5%. Grandchild 3, 5%. As the pie chart indicates, XYZ Corporation still owns its 75%, but the 25% owned by their previous natural person partner has been divided up according to the provisions of the wills of the owners as they passed away. Joint tenancy. Joint tenancy is another form of joint ownership. Unlike tenants in common, joint tenancy is only available to natural or real people. Corporations are not allowed to own property as joint tenants.